Circulation, GCSE. This is for EDUCAS or WJC. So first of all, you need to know why we have a circulatory system. So humans and other mammals are complex organisms with many specialised organs in different parts of their bodies. They need to be coordinated and must therefore be able to communicate with each other. One way of communicating is by using chemical messengers like hormones, which are made in certain organs and transported to others where they cause specific effects. So the body needs to transport these hormones and other substances from one place to another. Another example of a substance would be food molecules from the gut and oxygen from the lungs, and also waste products like urea being taken to the kidneys. So that's why we have a circulatory system. Transport is an important function of the blood, but because the blood system reaches every part of the body, it's also able to play a useful role in the immune system, which protects the body from infection. Pathogens, which are disease-causing organisms, cannot locate themselves anywhere that is far away from the blood system. Immunity is therefore a second important function of the circulatory system, and blood is moved around the circulatory system by the heart, which is a pump made of muscle that contracts repeatedly to push blood through the blood vessels. So blood is liquid, which allows it to be easily moved around the body. Take with that rare. It also contains cells, and both the cells and the liquid part of the blood play vital roles in its function. There are red blood cells, which have a biconcave disc side, which means it's round if you view it from that direction, but if you view it from the side, it has a dip in the middle. Not quite that extreme, but more so like that, instead of just a random shape, and that increases the surface area for absorption of oxygen. They're red because they contain a red blood pigment called hemoglobin, which absorbs the oxygen. Mature red blood cells are unusual because they have lost their nucleus, which allows more hemoglobin to be packed into their cytoplasm. You also have white blood cells, or phagocytes, in your blood. The structure of a phagocyte is shown in this diagram. These cells defend the body against disease. One way they do this is by ingesting bacteria. So white blood cells can change their shape and can also move. This allows them to squeeze through tiny little gaps in the capillary walls and enter tissue fluid to fight infection tissues. So if you look close, it's sort of an unusual shape. There's engulfed bacterium inside of them, a nucleus, and then there's a cell membrane. So the component of blood are as follows. You have plasma, which is the liquid part of blood, transports water-soluble substances including digestive food, CO2, urea, salts, and hormones, and distributes heat around the body. Red blood cells contains red pigment hemoglobin, which transports oxygen around the body. White blood cells defend the body against disease. There's various types of white blood cells, including phagocytes, which engulf and destroy bacteria. Other white blood cells make antibodies, which destroy pathogens in other ways, and they're responsible for the immunity function in blood. You also have platelets, which are cell fragments that help blood clot, which plugs wounds and stops bleeding, and also prevents bacteria from entering those wounds as well. You need to be able to draw the general shape of red and white blood cells and add labels to the drawings. So for the red blood cell, you just draw a circle, like so. You just need to be able to label the cell membrane. For phagocytes, you draw the irregular shape. You need to be able to label the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the cell membrane. The difference between red blood cells and white blood cells. Red blood cells are smaller, they have no nucleus, and they're a biconcave disc, which is just circular with a central depression. Phagocytes, which are a type of white blood cell, are larger, have a nucleus, and have an irregular shape. Blood circulates around the body because it's pumped by the heart, and moves around the body in blood vessels called arteries, veins, and capillaries. When it leaves the heart, the blood travels through the organs and arteries, so I think arteries starts with an A, away also starts with an A, so arteries away. the arteries branch into a large number of small capillaries which take the blood through the organs. The capillaries then join to form veins which carry the blood back to the heart. The structure of the circulatory system of a mammal is shown in the diagram below, so on this page, and you need to know that the diagram has been simplified. So the aorta actually branches into several different arteries, each of which goes to a particular organ. The blood is then transported out of the organs by different veins, which join to form the vena cava. So, yeah, you have the left side. Left side is always, the way it's done is the opposite, so it's like you're viewing somebody else's body. So that's somebody else, they're facing you, and that's their left side of the body, that's their right side of the body. Left side of the heart, you have the aorta, which transfers blood to the body, and then goes to the vena cava, which goes back to the heart, and then to the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary is always to do with lungs, so goes to the lungs and away from the heart, so pulmonary artery to the lung capillaries, pulmonary vein back to the heart, because it's going from pulmonary, lung, and it's vein, so it's not away from the heart, it's towards the heart. So the left heart side of the heart receives blood from the lungs and pumps it to the rest of the body, and the right side of the heart receives blood from the body and pumps it to the lungs. So pulmonary circulation, so the blood travels in two separate circuits around the body: pulmonary circulation to and from the lungs, systemic circulation to and from the rest of the body, and other organs. This is why the circulatory system is referred to as double circulation. In any one complete circuit of the body, it travels through the heart twice. So blood is moved around the body by pumping by the pumping of the heart. The heart can act as a pump because it's made of muscle. So when it contracts, it applies a force to the blood and pushes it into the arteries and around the body. The muscle in the heart is a special type called cardiac muscle, which is not found anywhere else in the body. Cardiac is just relating to the heart. It can contract on its own without any nervous stimulation, and it does not get tired, which prevents your heart from just wanting to stop. The exterior of the heart is shown in this diagram. The outside of the heart has its own blood supply via the coronary vessels. So you can see here, coronary vessels. Wrong diagram I was looking at. The coronary artery supplies the heart muscle with blood. Even though the heart is filled with blood, the muscular walls are so thick that the outside needs a separate blood supply. The blood supplies the nutrients and oxygen that the heart needs to keep beating. You don't need to identify coronary arteries and veins on diagrams. You just need to be able to identify the aorta. I'll go from the pulmonary vein. You need to be able to identify the pulmonary vein, and then the bicuspid valve, the left ventricle, the semilunar valves, and the aorta, and then the vena cava, the tricuspid valve, the right ventricle, the semilunar valve, and then the pulmonary artery. So left goes to the body, right goes to the lungs. So when the right goes to the lungs. This is the right. So pulmonary artery goes away from the heart artery towards the lungs, so pulmonary. And then it goes back through the aorta. It goes back through the pulmonary vein, because it's not away from the heart and it's to do with the lungs, and then it goes through the aorta to the body, and then through the vena cava. The left ventricle wall has a thicker muscle than the right ventricle wall because it needs to pump blood from the ventricles through the aorta to the rest of the body rather than from the ventricles just to the lungs. So it requires a lot less pressure behind it. You have your valves, they just prevent backflow of blood. Yeah. The right side deals with deoxygenated blood, left side deals with oxygenated blood. The mechanism on the two sides of the heart are the same, although the names of the structures are different. Another difference is that the left ventricle has a much thicker wall than that of the right ventricle, as I've said earlier, because it has to pump blood and all of the body, whereas the right ventricle only has to pump blood to the lungs. Yeah. So blood has to flow through the heart in one direction only, from atria to ventricles, and then out the two arteries at the top. So to ensure that there's one-way flow, there's valves to stop backflow in general. So the atria ventricular, which are between the atrium and the ventricles, are called bicuspid and tricuspid valves. The tricuspid valves are on the right side of the heart, and the bicuspid valves are on the left. So they are between the atria and the ventricles, and they stop backflow from the ventricles to the atria. And the semilunar valves, the beginning of the aorta and the pulmonary artery, make sure that the blood has left the heart is not sucked back in when the heart relaxes. You have a flowchart, just to summarise things. So oxygenated lungs goes to the pulmonary vein, to the left atrium, the bicuspid valve, to the left ventricle, semilunar valve, aorta, body tissues, vena cava, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, semilunar valve and pulmonary artery, and then the lungs. You need to know the different types of, the differences between arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, so it's at high pressure because the beating of the heart puts pressure on the blood, so they have to be able to resist that pressure, so they're a bit stretchy. Capillaries, the arteries deliver blood to the capillaries, which take blood through each of the organs of the body. The capillaries are very small blood vessels, and there are a very large number in each organ, forming an extensive network, so that every cell is near to a capillary carrying blood. It's in the capillaries that the exchange of materials occurred, so substances needed by cells diffuse out of the blood to the tissues, so like oxygen and nutrients. Substances produced by the cells diffuse into the blood, like waste products. So you have movement of oxygen and glucose and stuff going from the capillary into the cells, and then waste like urea moving from the cells into the blood, and then they can be taken to places like the liver to be dealt with. So substances pass through the walls of the capillaries. They're thin walls, and that helps with diffusion. Capillaries are also very narrow. That means blood flows slowly through them, and this and the fact that there are so many of them means that a lot of materials can be exchanged. Veins. The capillaries eventually discharge their blood into veins, which take it back to the heart. By the time the blood gets to the veins, there's no longer any pulse, and the blood pressure has dropped considerably. It's important that blood is returned to the heart at the same rate as it leaves, yet veins have no pulse. Blood is moved in the veins by the muscles between which the veins run. The contraction of these muscles while performing their functions squeezes the thin-walled veins, so moves the blood, but not in any particular direction. The direction is controlled by the valves, which prevent the flow of blood back towards the capillaries. Arteries do not need valves because the pulse ensures that the blood flows in the right direction, and you have a table just showing this. So arteries, the features are thick muscular wall and pulse. Veins, thinner muscular wall and arteries. Valves, large lumen, which is just the gap in the middle of the vessel. Lumens are just used to refer to any sort of gap in the middle of something. Capillaries, the wall is only 1 cell thick, blood flow is very slow, and there's extensive networks in each organ. Arteries, thick muscular walls to resist high blood pressure. Pulse pushes the blood through the vessel. Veins, thinner wall, doesn't need to resist so high of blood pressure, so it allows the muscles around the vessel to squeeze the blood and cause it to move. It has valves to ensure the movement of blood is only towards the heart. It has a large lumen, which increases the rate of flow of the blood. In capillaries, the wall is only 1 cell thick to allow easy passage of materials in and out by diffusion. Capillaries' blood flow is very slow, so it allows time for materials to be exchanged, and there's an extensive network of capillaries, so that every cell is near capillary, so more materials can be exchanged. So you have artery versus a vein, and a capillary here. Lumen is quite large compared to in a vein compared to an artery and a capillary. You have a muscle layer and tough outer coat. You can see the muscle layer of the artery is a lot bigger. You also have endothelium, which are thin walls and 1 cell thick, so they're just around the lumen. So you have some parts on cardiovascular disease, which is a common cause of death. CDV includes all the diseases of the heart and circulatory system, including coronary heart disease, heart attacks, angina, and strokes. Cardiovascular disease is usually linked to the process called atherosclerosis, which is the build-up of a substance called plaque in the walls of the arteries. So this is a normal artery. There's not really any plaque in there. You can see the artery wall, and there's a relatively normal blood flow. Well, presumably normal blood flow, because there's no build-up of plaque, so the blood can flow easily through the artery as it has enough room in the lumen. But as plaque builds up, the artery gets narrow, so there's restricted blood flow. So the space in the artery is reduced. The blood flow will be restricted as there's less room for the blood to flow. So atherosclerosis has a number of effects. It makes it more difficult for the blood to flow through the arteries, which means that the heart has to work harder to move the blood around. It can actually block smaller arteries, depriving the tissues they need of oxygen and nutrients. If this happens in a coronary artery, which is the artery that supplies the blood to the heart muscles, then it can cause a heart attack. Even if the blockage doesn't cause a heart attack, it often means that the person will get pains in the chest, which is a condition known as angina. The slower flow of blood also makes it more likely that a clot will form, which can also block off blood vessels and cause a heart attack. If the blockage happens in the brain, then you can get a stroke. So you can reduce the risk. There's a few ways. So some risks: high blood pressure. If you have a high blood pressure, it's an indication your heart is having to work harder than is ideal, which puts strain on both your heart and your blood vessels. So one cause of that can be a diet that has too high in salt. So to reduce that, you'd reduce the amount of salt you have. Smoking. Tobacco smoke contains carbon monoxide, which limits how much oxygen the blood can absorb. To get the right amount of oxygen to the tissues, the heart has to work harder. Smoking can also lead to high blood cholesterol, one form of cholesterol is the substance that forms plaque in the artery walls, so high cholesterol diet can increase the likelihood of atherosclerosis. A high cholesterol diet is one that contains too much saturated fat, which the body converts into cholesterol. Diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. Being overweight can also increase it, so excess weight is linked with the buildup of fat around the organs, including the heart, and the heart has to work harder to provide the energy to move the extra bulk around. Lack of exercise. Exercise improves the condition of the heart and helps avoid becoming overweight or obese, so if you don't get exercise so much, then it can affect your heart. Also, family history of heart disease. If close relatives have died of heart disease, then it increases the risk of CVD, suggesting that a person's genes can make heart disease more or less likely. And also, people of South Asian or African Caribbean ethnicity have statistically higher risk of CVD than people from other ethnic backgrounds. So obviously, you can't change your family history or ethnicity. So, and type 1 diabetes is also something you are basically born with. So the way that people with those the the way that people with those factors can reduce their risk of COD is just avoiding the other factors that can cause it. So it can be treated in a few ways. You can change your lifestyle related to diet and exercise. So people with cardiovascular disease are advised to exercise regularly, adopt a healthier diet so you reduce the risk factors. It's partly effective if the patient is overweight or if these factors contributed to the development of the condition. And you don't risk the dangers of surgery and drug side effects, but the new regime requires maintained willpower on the part of the patient. You can take statins, which are a group of drugs, and they're very effective at lowering blood cholesterol, so reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. They're taken daily in the form of tablets, so the treatment is very easy. They have a very good safety record, but taking any drug can have side effects. In the case of statins, they have nearly always have been both rare and mild. And the British Heart Foundation states that the risk of potentially dangerous side effects is low, like 1 in 10,000 patients. Statins do not prevent the cure cardiovascular disease, but they just reduce one of the major risk factors. You can also get angioplasty, so narrowed arteries can be widened by carrying out coronary artery angioplasty, where a short wire mesh tube called a stent is inserted into the problem artery. A small balloon is attached to it in front of the stent and is inflated to widen the artery. The stent expands and holds the widened artery open. The balloon is then deflated and removed. The stent is left permanently in place. The surgery is relatively minor, although any surgery carries some risk. The operation has a good long-term success record, but if the patient does not address other risk factors, then atherosclerosis may reoccur. So, 3 treatments. Changes the life factor. The advantages reduces their risk factors. Disadvantages requires willpower. Taking statins lowers blood cholesterol, reduces risk of cardiovascular disease. Good safety record, but there are some rare and mild side effects. And then angioplasty widens the narrow arteries. It's minor surgery, but if the patient does not address the other risk factors, atherosclerosis may reoccur, and also surgery carries risks. That is the whole topic. It's not too complicated, at least in my opinion, but just make sure to go over things and do part-time questions. Is a really good way of revising, and you just need to make sure you remember and understand the content enough to apply it.